Hello, everyone. Hello, happy builders, and welcome to another edition of Building SaaS on AWS. My name is Anthony McClure, and I am a solutions architect with the AWS SaaS Factory, and I will be your host for today's show. If you are currently a builder of software as a service solutions, or even just getting started in learning how to design, build, deploy, and operate software as a service solutions in multi-tenant environments, then this is the show for you. In every episode, we strive to bring you subject matter experts in the many varied topics of SaaS, and I guarantee today is no exception. But before we get started today, if you could please, especially if you're joining us live, jump into the chat session, say hello, let us know where you are. And of course, if you have any questions for our guest as we go through the show today, please feel free to put those into chat as well. And we'll try to answer those as soon as we can. Before we get started with today's content, also just want to give a shout out and say, if you are joining us live and if you like this kind of content, please be sure to jump in and hit the follow button so that you get notified and can see all of the great content that our AWS shows plays out there for you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's content. When we're talking about building software as a service solutions, we know that SaaS, of course, provides this huge potential for businesses to grow and scale businesses or their business. But these building this out can often be a big challenge, especially when you're working with complex networking infrastructure. We have to take into account things like service deployments and communication and security across even many different compute environments in some cases, whether that's serverless or containers or instances. And these complexities can be, really difficult to get your head around and to implement in AWS. So we're going to be talking about a newer service today called Amazon VPC Lattice that can potentially help you with that. But to help us to answer those questions and see what this looks like, I would like to bring in today's guest. Welcome to the show, Babak Parvisi. How are you today?
Good, Anthony. Good to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Why don't you go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about who you are, Babak, and what you do for us here at AWS?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Babak Parvisi. I'm a solutions architect here with AWS SaaS Factory, and we help our customers and our partners move to a SaaS delivery model running on AWS. So that could be helping a startup develop new business capabilities, an ISV who's migrating an existing application, or helping partners who are just optimizing solutions that are already running on AWS. And so we provide both business and technical enablement.
Excellent. Very, very nice. And I think is this your first appearance on the show, Babak?
This is, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm newbie here. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll certainly welcome. Yeah, no, and thank you for being here.
Yeah,
so, before we dive into our specific topic today, we're talking about Amazon VPC Lattice and how it can help our customers. But, what are some of your initial thoughts and what really drove you to go down this road and start taking a look at this service?
Yeah. I think your introduction was actually really great. If I could just share the audience real quick, a little bit of setup here, give a little the problem statement here in a little more detail. So we're talking about, SaaS providers are typically adopting multi-account, multi-VPC architectures, or just organizations in general, and they're using these VPCs and accounts to model their business and service offerings after, or just adhering to some sort of a multi-account best practice. Now, when it comes time to communicate across these accounts and these VPCs, we can run into some networking complexities. Okay. Now, before we dive into the technicals there, so as you were saying, why is this even important? So we're always emphasizing as a SaaS organization that you want to have that operational efficiency, that agility to be able to pivot quickly in a competitive market. You want to be able to accommodate rapid scale and growth. Okay. So if there's something that's bottlenecking you in your architecture, that could be a challenge. Security, of course, is top of mind. To any SaaS application, you want to make sure that your tenants are going to the right place and not to the wrong place. So we say, cross-tenant access. That's when tenant A can see tenant B's data, and that can be a catastrophic event for your SaaS business. So we want to make sure that those sort of things don't happen. And this is where I feel Amazon VPC Lattice can really help speak to that operational efficiency, agility, without compromising that security and actually simplifying that whole experience for us.
Right. Yes, because when we talk about SaaS, we, like you say here, the promise of SaaS, we talk about the value proposition of what SaaS brings to an organization. But those things don't come for free, right? It takes a
Right.
lot of work and effort, especially when we're talking about the security, like you mentioned here.
Mhm.
So, talking about Amazon VPC Lattice, then,
Yeah.
what exactly is this service? I know it's relatively new,
Right.
right, as far as networking is concerned. So, maybe give us
Yeah.
an introduction.
Yeah. So simply put, I mean, Amazon VPC Labs was created to simplify application layer networking. And so when we say application layer, we're talking about protocols like HTTP, HTTPS, so that we could simplify things such as connectivity, security, observability without feeling like you need to be a networking expert. Okay. Think of it really as a fully managed networking surface that simplifies the process of reducing the need to work with a lot of the lower level networking building blocks. And we're going to get into that here shortly as a comparison. But real quickly, it's composed of these four main areas. Okay, we're going to talk about services, service networks, auth policies, how we're going to secure all of this. Service directories, we're not going to talk about that, but it's simply put, it's just a account level view of all the services that are available to you. Okay, so what is a service?
Now, one thing I didn't see
Sure.
there are things like route tables and things like that. I
Right.
assume, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're going to get into that shortly. I've got a demo, but again, it's all about simplifying that whole process, right? So
I like simple.
Yeah, simple. It's fully managed for us. And so we're going to get into a lot of that in a little bit more detail as we dive into the console. But just to give the audience just a very high level overview of these building blocks. Okay. So we're going to keep this simple. So what is a service in Amazon VPC Lattice? Well, it's basically a logical abstraction that sits in front of your application. Think of it really as just a DNS endpoint. Okay. And if you're familiar with the Elastic Load Balancing family, we have a listener. So this would be like a protocol, a port. And then we have these various rules. Okay, so I could have path-based rules or rules that inspect the header that are then associated with these target groups that can now take us to various targets that hold our various compute options. Okay, so my logos could go to EC2, or my orders path can go to Lambda. Maybe I can go to containers in another situation. Okay, so really, really simple.
Almost. Yeah, and it almost looks like a load balancer right now, like an ALB or something like that. With
Yeah,
groups.
exactly. That's exactly right. If you're familiar with that Elastic Load Balancing family, that's basically what it looks like. It's not the same, but very similar. Absolutely. Okay, so that's just a service, very high level overview. Now, once we have our services, okay, we need some way to share them. Okay, and this is where service networks come in. So we can think of a service network as a logical grouping mechanism, and just think of two things right now. A way to make service associations. Okay, so this little container here, we're going to hold our services, and we'll see how this works shortly. And then where we can make VPC associations. Okay, now there's a lot of lower level networking constructs that can do this. They're a little bit more complex, but VPC Lattice makes this very simple. Okay, so for right now, think about we're going to make our VPC associations and our service associations using our service network, and then we're going to have authorization controls as well. So let's dive into that next. And then the last part is authorization policy. So now that we have our service and our service network, now we can attach these IAM resource-based authorization policies, both at the service and service network level, where we can get coarse and fine grained. And we'll see how we can enforce tenant isolation here moving forward.
And it looks like as well that we had here some more information about this, right? I think there was in a reInvent talk here recently that I just put up on the screen.
Absolutely. And if you're a beginner to VPC Lattice, Amazon VPC Lattice, I highly recommend going back and watching the talk by Justin Davies, given last year's reInvent, entitled Amazon VPC Lattice, Architecture Patterns and Best Practices. Great introduction for beginners. That's where I started. So I highly recommend you go there. A lot of good concepts in there, some things I've talked about here, and a lot more.
Interesting. Yeah, so that's great. The service sounds very promising, really. But can we maybe then discuss some of these common challenges that we know SaaS kind of brings to the
Yeah.
table, and then how VPC Lattice really kind of simplifies this problem that we've always had?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and set the table here with a concrete example, right? So we've kind of set up the problem statement. So let's start out with this multi-account SaaS setup. Now, I'm going to start with this top level account here. And this is going to hold our SaaS application. I'm going to call this the public SaaS app account. And this account is going to basically field all the public traffic, okay, all the north-south traffic coming in. And a typical workflow would include your tenant end users coming in here. They would sign in with the identity provider, such as Amazon Cognito. They would then get their ID and their access tokens, and then they would make some authorized request against your SaaS REST API. Okay,
Sure. Yeah.
it's pretty simple here. Now, we want to do two things here. First is we want to be able to route these tenants to their respective tiered accounts. Okay, so in this case, these tenants are going to be routed to this basic tier account. And this is holding what we call a pooled deployment. So these tenants are going to be sharing the same resources and infrastructure here. Okay, and very typical in a SaaS offering, your tenants might start out in this free tier, or maybe it's a cheaper tier. If they like your service, then they can upgrade to some sort of a higher paying tier where they get additional features. And in this particular account, we're gonna produce what's known as a silo deployment. So each tenant will be given their own dedicated resources and infrastructure.
Yep.
Okay. Now this could be due to compliance reasons. Better features, perhaps maybe they want better performance, whatever the case may be.
Security, yeah. Enhanced security, things like that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Easier to calculate cost per tenant. There's a lot of advantages, but a lot more infrastructure too, and a lot more that we have to ultimately wire up here. And we see this kind of pattern over and over again in our customers as they're building SaaS.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of complexity behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe they want to use containers here. Maybe we give them the option to do containers here. Now, so here's a central question. So what is the best way to privately, securely, and efficiently route these tenants to the respective tiered accounts? Okay. And so this is where
we would have used something like VPC peering, right? In our current way of doing things.
Yeah. And let's talk about a couple of those traditional solutions here, right? That might come up in conversations, right? So when it comes to connectivity, all right, VPC peering, I think this is a suitable choice when you have a handful of VPCs. Obviously, this can get a little bit complicated as you need to peer more and more VPCs together. So VPC peering is not transitive. So if I have VPC, A, B, and C, if I peer A and B, and A and C, doesn't mean B and C can talk, right? So then we can maybe throw in a transit gateway, maybe to thin that out. But ultimately, you'll have to be concerned about these CIDR block overlaps. So if I have two VPCs with the same CIDR address block, I can't peer them together or with the transit gateway because it's ambiguous, right?
Right. Yep.
You
can't route it, right? You end up with routing issues in the long
run. Yeah, exactly. And so, we've all talked to customers and partners who've run up against this challenge, and it's a pretty big operational overhead to have to go back and re-CIDR your subnets and go through that whole process again, right? Another option here I've seen, you can do some API gateway integrations, like a private integration, but it's maybe starting to feel a little bit complicated. But I think overall, the best solution here would be something like an AWS private link, where we have this consumer service provider kind of pattern going on from the top to the bottom. Now, with private link, there's a little bit more operational expense to it. So I have to put a VPC endpoint service coupled with an NLB down here, as well as here, and punch in a couple of VPC endpoints up here for the private communication. Just a little bit more overhead, right? And so the idea is, what if all this could go away? Is there a simpler solution? It turns out it is. With Amazon VPC Lattice, we can kind of create something that's more of a simpler networking experience, where I don't have to worry about CIDR block overlaps. Okay, so if when we were talking about the service networks where we, associate, the VPCs together, we don't have to worry about any CIDR block overlaps. VPC Lattice automatically takes the care of that behind the scenes for us. And then for the operational expense, we can kind of do away with the load balancers, the NLBs, and the VPC endpoint service. Just makes that a lot simpler.
Nice.
Now, before we move away from this, there's just one other thing that I wanted to bring up here. So, we kind of talked about again, going back to that operational efficiency, agility story, but also from the security standpoint. Notice that we have various compute options available to us, right? We have serverless instances, maybe some containers here. So depending on the workload, I may want to use serverless Lambda functions for simple database CRUD style operations. Okay.
Sure.
So SaaS organizations want to have that flexibility, right? But if I have a longer standing task, I might want to run that on EC2. Maybe I want to use containers for something else. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could use some uniform security networking policy that could span all these compute options? Okay. Now, let me give an example of what I'm talking about here. So when it comes to containers, for example, like EKS, we have a reference architecture that uses a namespace per tenant model. Okay. But namespacing in and of itself doesn't provide strict networking boundaries. So we need a service mesh like Istio to enforce hard network policies. But what that requires is deploying these sidecar proxies along our application containers, right? And so I think that the disadvantage there is that we're handling network isolation at the compute level, and this could add complexity and increase costs. Where if we could apply that isolation at the network level instead, we could maybe simplify that experience and possibly other qualities like cost. So that's another thing I just wanted to bring up real quick, and we'll look into that in more detail as we look at how we set up a VPC Lattice service.
Nice. And as far as working with EKS, for instance, and VPC Lattice, I believe that there is an article that's been written specifically about that. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a specific implementation there. It's called goes through the AWS API Gateway Controller. So this is a specific EKS integration pattern. So we could just drop that link in. We're not going to go into it today. It's a little bit out of scope for today's talk, but definitely check that out. So wanted to point the audience in that direction.
Sure. Let me jump that. I'll post that into to chat as well here. I think we have a link directly to that article. Awesome.
Okay, great.
All right. So, okay. So I think we're kind of covered then as far as the basics. It certainly sounds like VPC Lattice can solve a heck of a lot of different problems for us here. But what would this look like then? This infrastructure with a multi-account, SaaS solution that we're building, maybe using around one of these reference architectures, and then including VPC Lattice is the way that we network this.
Yeah. So why don't we go ahead and build off of what we were just saying, but this time start building it out with an actual multi-account VPC Lattice approach. Yeah. Okay. I want to start out with the top level account. So similar to what we were talking about, this is going to hold our SaaS application. I'm going to call this the public SaaS API account. Okay. So just like before, we have our tenant end users. They'll sign in here with an identity provider. They'll get their ID access tokens. They'll make this authorized request, against our SaaS REST API. Now, at this point, we're going to be handling that centralized ingress, pattern. And what I've introduced here is this Lambda proxy that is VPC enabled. Now, we're going to get into this in a little bit more detail. So let's just keep a high level overview of what this thing is doing. So this is going to basically take our JSON web token, after we've authenticated here. And it's going to extract that the tenant context from that JOT. This would be our tenant identifier and our tier. And it's going to make routing.
So we're still using just the standard sort of solution that we generally talk about as a best practice for customers.
Exactly, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for reinforcing that, Anthony. Exactly. So this is all pretty much what I would say like SaaS 101 boilerplate.
101. Yep.
Yeah. We're getting our JOT token. Our JOT token is going to have our tenant context embedded in it as custom claims. This Lambda proxy then is going to take that information and it's going to make routing decisions. Now, we're going to manage our DNS records with a DNS service. So I'm using Amazon Route 53. I'm going to use a private hosted zone actually, because we don't need any public access here for this.
Sure.
for that. So that's basically the top level account. And then what we'll do is, as we said before, we have our pooled services. So if you're in the basic tier account, you're going to go over here to the left-hand side, and you're going to call the VPC Lattice service here to take us there. Now, again, this is our pool deployment. So these basic tier tenants are going to share the same resources and infrastructure. If you're a premium tier tenant, it's going to take that information. It's going to route us over here, okay, to our premium tier account. And this is a silo deployment. So each tenant will get their own dedicated resources and infrastructure.
And this is then also using, because of the Route 53 routing here, we're using subdomain per tenant, essentially.
Absolutely.
As far as the premium tenants.
Exactly. And this is, again, another kind of SaaS style pattern where it's convenient to use subdomain style routing. Now, you'll notice here that I've added another account here in the middle. Okay. And now your operational structure might be different here, but let's just say that there's SaaS administrators within your organization. Maybe they want tighter control over the service network. They want to be able to pick and choose what services live in here. Now, you don't have to do it like this. You can stick this, manage this service network up here if you wanted to. But what I wanted to demonstrate here is that we can have all these different accounts, different VPCs floating around, and we can easily share them and manage them using AWS Resource Access Manager. Okay.
Okay.
So for example, with AWS RAM, it's something as simple as I can go into my basic tier account. And of course, you would set this up with your infrastructure as code as well. But you can go in here, you could create a resource share and say, listen, I want to be able to share my basic tier service with my admin account so that my service network can include it. Okay. And I can share my admin account with my public SaaS API account in order to make a VPC association up here. Okay. So again, very simple, nothing very complicated. If you were to go and do this in the console, it would probably take a couple of minutes. Okay. And then of course, by the way, we are going to release a blog shortly with this reference solution. So just hang tight. It's going through a review process at the moment, but this will all be available. Excellent. And there's infrastructure as code behind it as well, so that you can deploy this within your own account. Okay.
Very nice. Now we also talked about, I would say maybe a question that comes up here then too is, what if we're dealing with something like a multi-regional situation or something like that?
Oh, yeah. So a couple considerations with VPC Lattice is, so when it comes to multi-region, there are some patterns there. Now, it is a regional service, so you would have to deploy your service and service network within the supported region. Now, there is another article here, Anthony, I think I mentioned we want to drop in here that discusses this in a lot more detail. So we're not going to go into, again, a little bit out of scope for today's discussion, but there's a really good blog behind this. It talks about some multi-region considerations there and some patterns that you can apply. One other thing worth noting also, as far as some limitations here, is we are dealing with application layer. So again, this is protocols such as HTTP, HTTPS, gRPC. If you need layer 4, then you would need to go with something like a AWS private link.
I see. So if we were doing something with sockets or anything that's not simple TCP/IP, HTTP, then we wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, VPC Lattice was really created to simplify the application layer networking. I think in a lot of cases that satisfies people's use cases, customers.
Certainly, absolutely. So I guess in those cases, right, if you absolutely needed to have anything outside of layer 7 for your networking, like maybe some layer 4 things like you were saying, or if you're dealing with this multi-regional aspect, then maybe VPC Lattice isn't exactly the right choice for you in those cases. But otherwise, it seems to really simplify networking.
Yeah, it really does. And we'll get into, once we get into the demo and look into the console, you'll see basically how simple it really is.
Nice. Okay. I guess we've maybe established the overall architecture or what it looks like at this point. So what about, the SaaS specific principles, things like tenant routing and isolation and all those? How can VPC Lattice help with that?
Yeah. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look here. So we kind of cover the high level overview. So let's take a look at what this is doing, right? And and see how we can get a little more SaaS specific here. So as we noted earlier, so this Lambda proxy, we're going to get our sign in, we're going to get our tokens coming in, and this is our JSON web token. So this is kind of like really where it kicks everything off. Now this Lambda proxy, very simple. It's going to do two things. It's going to take that token, it's going to validate it, and it's going to extract the tenant context. Okay. So what's tenant context? This is tier tenant ID. So this is a bit of, it's kind of SaaS 101. The way they
again, yeah.
Right.
Yep,
okay.
Yep. We need to understand who, not just who is authenticated, but we also need to know what tenant they're a part of so that we can do the routing and the isolation and all those kind of fun things.
Yeah, absolutely. So then our tier here is going to help us. So we got our custom claims here. So this is going to be, for now, just a basic or a premium tier. And then our tenant identifier, for example, is going to be like tenant 1, tenant 2, and so forth. Okay. So once we get that information at this stage, what the Lambda proxy is going to do is just going to make routing decisions and call our VPC Lattice service. Okay. So now at the time that we set up a VPC Lattice service, we can give it a custom domain name. So that's basically what this host name is. So this basic or tenant1.saasapp.private or tenant2
Yep.
is basically coming from here, right? We're extracting it. And then we're just going to basically proxy everything else down the line. Okay. So we've got our path. We're going to go to our orders path. And then we're going to continue to convey tenancy downstream. Now, right now, we're using this to make routing decisions, okay? Later on, we're going to see how we're going to use this to enforce tenant isolation at a fine-grained level using Amazon VPC Lattice authorization policies, okay? So a little foreshadowing there, Anthony. Okay, so when it comes to, so let's talk about the Route 53 here. When it comes time to managing these custom domain names, when we first set up a VPC Lattice service, it's going to give us this fully qualified domain name here on the right. Okay, so this is kind of this long, goofy name. Obviously, we're not going to use this for our purposes. We want something nice like this. So you're just going to need a DNS service to manage those records, and you're just going to simply make that association here. So, for example, this is my pooled service. These are my siloed services, and we're following this subdomain per tier or tenant routing. Now, another good resource for the audience, Anthony, is if they want to read more about this pattern, this Lambda proxy pattern. This is actually where I got it. There's a really nice article blog out there. It's called Securing API Endpoints Using Amazon API Gateway and Amazon VPC Lattice. So it's basically saying, oh, hey, if I wanted to use VPC Lattice with API Gateway, how would I do it? This is one option. It's a really nice option. I really like it, and definitely check it out.
We actually do have a question actually that has come in from chat here. Let me clear this banner. I did drop that link, by the way, into chat as well. We got a question from Qul85. So he's asking, where does VPC Lattice sit when you have network inspections or inspection happening? Like there may be a network firewall or something like that.
Let me see here. So, okay, with say like EC2, you can still use your security groups. You can still use firewalls behind it. Now you need to, so for example, you can have like this security in depth strategy where you have some security group, let's say like it's a firewall on your EC2 that's basically sitting behind it. You need to give access to VPC Lattice. So it was meant to have that defense in depth strategy. So if I'm calling, say, an EC2 that has a security group, that security group needs to have basically a prefix list. And we're going to show how that routing kind of works a little bit during the demo. But your firewall will have to, like for the security group, will have to include the prefix list to allow VPC Lattice to come through.
So I assume, though, that all of the normal kind of standard networking and protection options that we have, guard duty, web application firewall, all of those, and using our CDN and stuff, all that still works?
Yeah, and so that would sit in front of, so basically when I showed the that centralized ingress, so all your perimeter protection like WAF, DDoS, maybe you have a CloudFront distribution as well, that could all sit out in front, and then
pass on from there.
Yeah. So that's typically, I actually should have maybe shown that earlier, but or mentioned it. But yeah, you can still have your perimeter protection right there. And so when it comes to like things like firewalls or security groups downstream, those will have to give access to VPC Lattice to call them as targets.
Makes sense. All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for the question. Any other questions out there, please feel free and drop them into chat or any follow-up questions as well. For those of you that are joining us a little bit later here, thank you and welcome. You are currently watching Building SaaS on AWS. My name is Anthony McClure. I'm a solutions architect with the AWS SaaS Factory, and we are joined here today by Babak Parvisi, also a solutions architect from the AWS SaaS Factory. And we are diving deep into how Amazon VPC Lattice can be used as a network for your networking infrastructure to help simplify SaaS deployments and SaaS application creation. So I think where we left off here, we were taking a look at the routing. But from this point, I know we have basic tier tenants, and then some premium tenants here. What happens next, essentially? So maybe if we start with basic.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered basically the SaaS routing part, right? That's one big side of it. Now, what about the tenant isolation? So we said that we're going to pass the tenant context downstream, where we can now enforce that tenant isolation. Before we move on here real quick, the reason why this Lambda proxy is VPC enabled is in order so that we can make a VPC association with our service network. Yeah. And then once we do that, then we can discover our services. Okay. So
got it.
That's all I was trying to show there. All right. So let's dive into the tenant isolation part here. Okay. So going back, slide looks a little familiar. Again, when we create a VPC Lattice service, we have the option to give it a custom domain name. That's what we're going to do here. And then we have our various listeners and rules. So now we have our logos, our orders, and our products. Now our orders and products is going to go to Lambda. Our logos is going to go to our EC2. And now what we can do is we can attach a fine-grained authorization policy to our service. All right. Now I just want to highlight the condition key down here. So recall that when we called our VPC Lattice service through our routing step there, that we passed in the request header that had the key value of tier equal to basic or tenant ID equal to the tenant identifier.
Tenant context, right? For which tenant we're working with.
Absolutely. And so now this is where we're going to enforce that tenant isolation at the network level, okay, which is very nice and convenient. I always felt like when I was first looking at this, that this was just very conducive to the SaaS principles that we were used to talking about, right? Now,
absolutely, using attribute-based access control, essentially in this case, from at the networking layer. So by having this policy, we're basically ensuring that even if by shenanigans you were somehow able to route yourself to one of those tenant premium areas, right? Tenant 1, tenant 2, right. This would stop that essentially.
Exactly. It would deny the wrong access, right? And that cross-tenant access that we always say can be so devastating to your SaaS business, right? Once you lose that trust, you might not be able to regain it, right?
Absolutely.
And so here's the other part that we were kind of emphasizing earlier. We might have different compute options here. Now we can have this uniform policy, okay, ahead of all this that applies to everything behind it, right? So I didn't have to wrap my head around like, well, how am I going to do this for Lambda versus EC2 versus containers, right? I can
That's very nice. Yeah.
Very convenient. And again, just very, very conducive to SaaS, in my opinion, when we're talking about tenant isolation. So let's move on to the premium tier service. So basically the same thing here, Anthony, except for now we're doing this service per tenant model. So tenant 1 will get their own service, tenant 2 will get their own service, and infrastructure all the way down to tenant N. And the other part that I want to emphasize here is the fine-grained auth policy. Pretty much the same. We got this condition key that we can use. So we're passing this in the request header. And as long as the key of tenant ID is equal to that specific tenant identifier, then we're good to go.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, this is really very interesting. And it again, just greatly simplifies the overall process where it's much more understandable, a lot less, kind of arcane individual pieces. Now, that's not to say that's not all happening in the background, but this managed service way of doing this really
Yeah.
takes a lot of that complexity away, it feels like.
Yeah.
So I do, yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Did you have something to add?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I was just going to emphasize again, just kind of going back to those higher order business objectives. It's like operational efficiency, agility, security, right? We didn't have to compromise any of those as we were going through this. It was actually making it easier for us to apply that.
So one thing that does seem to come up quite often more recently and becoming more and more popular over time is that we are seeing consumers and SaaS providers that want a model where the consumer can bring their own account, right? That
Mhm.
they can actually have a distribution or information or part of the application in their accounts. So, how would VPC Lattice serve as an alternative to what we've mainly been talking about lately, which had been private link?
Yeah, exactly. So customers, they often prefer this, like you were mentioning, this, bring your own account or BYOA model, right? And this is could be due to, privacy reasons, data privacy. They want to avoid transit costs, and so VPC Lattice makes this again simple. So if you recall, when we were sharing our service network before with our SaaS API account, it's similar to that. So we can use customer managed permissions using AWS RAM. So here I am, I'm the SaaS provider, and this is my service network. I can share my service network with a customer account. And at the time that I do that, I can specify the specific customer managed permissions where I can, have deny and allow rules, very similar to like how we think about IAM, right? Where I can say, okay, I'm going to share my service network with you. You can make a VPC association there. You can discover my services. All right.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't add services, or maybe you can, depending on what your arrangement is with that
Sure.
customer.
Yeah.
Right. Again, you have that control where you can now,
Like
simply
a fine-grained policy that you can put in between, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So again, kind of really simplifies that experience for us. So
Very neat.
that's basically, yeah, check that out. That's customer managed permissions. They added this not too long ago, but I think very, again, helpful for SaaS providers in this case, where, again, you would have to, with private link, you'd have to do the NLB with the VPC endpoint services and
Right.
and all that stuff.
And
Just a
then
little
locking it all down is
right. Yep.
super important. Yeah. And a bit more difficult there too. Well, I tell you, I'm pretty convinced, but I would like to see, what does this actually look like in practice?
Yeah.
Can we maybe have a demo of what an architecture like
Yeah.
this looks
Yeah.
like?
Let's go ahead and talk about this. Let me reshare my screen here, Anthony. Let me get on my architecture screen. I'm just going to bounce back and forth here with the audience just to
Sure, no
kind of
worries.
walk and talk through some of the things that we were saying here with the console. Give me one moment, please. All right.
No worries.
Zoom this guy in. There we go. Okay.
I think we're seeing. I think we're seeing your other desktop actually.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry about that. Let's go present. Share screen here. Okay.
There we go.
Anthony, everything looks good now?
Yeah, let me bring it on to say, there we go. Okay.
Okay. So I kind of got my my architecture diagram up here first, so you can see everything well. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay. So let's start here, Anthony. Let's start in the middle. I just want to show everyone the admin account here where we have our service network, and our service network is going to hold our basic tier service and our tenant specific service for right now, our siloed tenant. We're only going to have 2 services. So what we'll do, I'm in my admin account. We have our VPC dashboard here. I'm going to kind of scroll down here to the bottom, and you'll see we still have these nice new shiny flags here for VPC Lattice. All right.
Hey.
Go ahead and we'll go ahead and I still feel it.
And this is all generally available, right? This is
right.
out and available for production.
This is all. So yeah, this went to GA March 2023, I believe. So still, relatively new. There's of course a lot of inertia, right, when you change these things. So people are still feels new. Okay, so let me click on my service network. There it is right there. I'll click on it. Now, all we want to do here is just inspect a couple simple things. Now, we said earlier that our service network does two main things. We've got our service associations and our VPC associations. And also, we can apply coarse-grained policies there. But for this talk, I want to focus more on the fine-grained policy where we're going to look at the tenant isolation. But here are our service associations, right? So we've got our basic tier service and our premium tier, Tenant 2 here, okay? So basically, that's what we're looking at right now. Then we have our VPC associations, all right? And we have a VPC association that is currently happening here with our public SaaS API account. So let me go ahead and drill into that, all right? Let's go over here. Now we're going to get a red up here. That's because we need to change accounts. I'm going to go into my public SaaS API account here. Right. And what we can see here. All right, so I'm going to we're on our VPC here. What I want to do, I want to jump over to our route table. Okay, I just want to show the audience like what's going on here. Alrighty, so let me jump back here. Now, when we call a VPC Lattice service, remember, we can always think of it as a DNS endpoint, right? So I've got this basic SaaS app or this Tenant 1, Tenant 2 SaaS app.private. What happens is this DNS endpoint resolves to an IP address within what we call this link local address range, okay?
Okay.
There's one for IPv4 and there's one for
IPv6 too, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I didn't have to do anything here. I didn't add this. VPC Lattice automatically did it for me. But just to give the audience an idea of like, well, how is this thing routing? Well, VPC Lattice is doing this behind the scenes for us, so we didn't have to do it.
There's no real magic, right? I mean, it's still doing all of these kinds of things that we would expect, or we could do on our own behind the scenes. But here it's managed by VPC Lattice. Very cool.
Exactly. And then, this is the boilerplate right here. If there's anything, this is the VPC's, CIDR address block. So anything will get routed locally. That's within here. Anything outside of that doesn't for the public internet is going to go through our internet gateway. Okay. So that's simple. So while we're in here, let's also look at the Amazon Route 53, see what that's up to. Okay. So I'm going to go to Route 53 here.
So we should be able to see our subdomains for different tenants.
Exactly.
The basic and that premium tier one. Absolutely.
Exactly. And so we have, again, I'm using a private hosted zone. So we've got this SaaS app.private host name. All right, let's click on that. And here we are just managing our DNS records right here. So that's our pooled, right? That's the guy that's going down here. And then we have our silo tenants that are our premium tier tenants that are going to go over here. All right, pretty simple. And now when we create a VPC Lattice service, it's going to create, again, this fully qualified domain name. We're not going to use that. So we need a DNS service to be able to manage those records. And so I'm using a private hosted zone. Now you can use a public hosted zone, but I don't need these to be open to the internet. So these are all going to be private. Right. Okay. Now, let's jump to our basic tier account. All right. Hope I'm not making anybody dizzy here.
A lot of moving parts, but that's what happens with networking.
Yeah. I just wanted to just show everybody how, this is basically this one-to-one mapping here, but what we're looking at here in our architecture. And again, this reference solution is going to be coming out. So you can deploy this in your own account when the blog and the GitHub samples come out. So let's take a look at this. And we're going to look at our orders, our products, as well as the basic tier service. Okay, so we're going to have to go to VPC again. And come down here. Let's click on our services. All right, so there's my basic tier service. All right. I'm going to come down here.
This is acting as our pooled tenants, right?
That is correct. That is correct. So let's look at the routing. Okay, so we're associated with that service network that we saw earlier in the admin account. Take a look at our routing here. All right. So we talked about earlier how we have our conditions, right? We've got our orders and our products. This is going to be going to our orders and targets product or our target groups. And our target groups are going to have a target of Lambda. Okay, so we got our various compute options there, which is really nice. I've got my logo service. This is going to go to EC2. Let's go ahead and jump on over there. And that's going to go to an instance target type. Okay. Pretty simple. And we said that we're going to unify access through this authorization policy down here. And this is where we're going to get fine. This is our fine-grained policy here, where we can enforce that tenant isolation at the tier level. Okay. And what was sending this information? It was our Lambda proxy that was proxying this down. So it's going to send that key
pulled out of the JOT. Yeah, that it pulled out of the JOT token from the authentication.
Yeah. Again, very simple. Nice. And just one more here, Anthony, if I can just jump.
So again, despite the fact that we're using different kinds of compute for that particular application, one policy manages the networking security across all of those.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's just a great thing that we don't have to worry about at each individual compute level. All right. So now
we back to the premium tenant again.
Yeah. So now let's take a look at this side of the equation. All right. This is going to be our premium tier tenants and their own siloed deployment. So this is just tenant 2. Let's click on that. Again, pretty much the same thing. We got the service network association. We've got our routing, very similar to what we just showed. Okay. So we've got our orders and our products, for example. Let's go to our access. And very similar. Again, we're applying the fine-grained tenant isolation here, except for just slightly different. Here, we're going to set the key value to the tenant ID and the actual tenant identifier.
All right. Yeah. Yep, because this is locked down to this specific tenant since they have their own environment. Yeah.
Yep, that's correct. That's correct. And if it's something else, then it will deny. Alrighty, so let's see what we got. We got a few more minutes left. What I wanted to do, I have a script that I can also show what's going on here. We still have a little bit of time left, yeah, Anthony?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, so along with this reference solution that's going to be made available, excuse me, I want to show the audience, basically, we're going to mimic this process right here. I've got a shell script that's basically going to log in. We're going to echo the JOT token out. And so basically going to go through this process, okay? And
it's kind of like just a stream of all the steps, essentially.
Exactly. Okay, so here's what it looks like. There's this, again, call service script here. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to call my service with all the different paths here as tenant 1. So let's go ahead and, so what this script has done, it's logged in using Cognito. Here's our token. Let's jump over to the browser real quick and just see what's going on. Whoops.
So this is the content that would come back out of Cognito, the JOT token that we've been talking about that contains, in this particular case, or best practices with SaaS, the tenant context. So we're going to take a look at that here is the idea.
Yeah. So here we go. So I've logged in, and again, SaaS 101. We've got our custom claims here, and we've got tier. Okay, that's basic, and then we also have our tenant identifier. Okay, very simple. Now, when we call this service, we're going to call the orders, the products, and the logos. And basically what I've done here, Anthony, is just have my Lambda say, hey, I'm in the basic tier Lambda orders service, and I'm in the basic tier account. Okay, so it's just basically
just echoing out who's responding, essentially.
Exactly. And so my orders is, remember, we had a target group that had a target of Lambda. Products was the same thing. So let me just reference the reference architecture, right? So orders, products was Lambda, and then our logos was EC2. Sorry about that, folks. So here, it's got a header tag in there, but it says a basic tier EC2 logo service in the basic tier account. And then for tenant 2.
And this is a premium tier tenant.
This is the premium tier tenant. Let's just go ahead and paste that into Jot.io. Again, there lets us know that that's the premium tier. Okay. And then our tenant identifier is tenant 2. And so going back, we should now get routed to this side. All right. And that's basically what happens here. So calling orders, So this is now saying Tenant 2 Lambda orders. They have their own dedicated resources and infrastructure, and then premium tier account, and then products. Sorry, I guess I forgot to call the logo service. I hope you can forgive me on that one, but yeah. Okay, and so that is pretty much it, Anthony.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. It's really amazing how much can be done very simply. And I assume, as far as setting this up, Bobak, that there's, full CDK capabilities for this. We can do our infrastructure as code in setting up these networks. So doing onboarding, is that simplified as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And you will, so we actually have a CDK project behind this. So there's an infrastructure as code. So you can plug it into your DevOps pipeline, into your control plane operations. So when you onboard a tenant, it basically sets all that up for you. We have different CDK stacks that we're using, for example, across these different accounts. And yeah, absolutely, it simplifies that whole DevOps experience as well.
Nice. And we do just have a couple more minutes. We're actually running up on time here. Time flies when we're having fun, learning something new. But I'm sure one question that's probably going to come up is, what's this thing cost?
Oh yeah. So yeah, let's talk about that really quickly here. There is so it's about 2.5 cents per VPC Lattice service. Okay. And then there's a data processing charge. Actually, I do have let me pull that up here real quick. Or I can just talk through it real quickly here. So I'll just talk through this real simply. So for each VPC Lattice service, you have a 2.5 cent hourly charge. Okay. And then there's also a data processing charge. So for every gigabyte that goes through, that's another 2.5 cents. Okay. And then there's a request per hour charge. Now your free tier there is the first 300,000 is free. The next million requests is 10 cents. Okay. But again, think of it as it is a fully managed service. It's taking care of a lot for you, simplifying a lot of things.
Absolutely.
But, there is obviously, there is some cost to it.
There's always a cost involved, and managed services are, it's typically going to be a little more expensive than if you were to do this all on your own. But the savings and the efficiency and I would even say added security, because it's really putting a layer of security for you to fill in versus having to build out on your own is really impressive.
Yeah, and that part's really, really huge. Is that you don't want to compromise security as you move through these things, right? There's no shortcuts here, and it really locks that down. I mean, those authorization policies are just, again, really easy to use, and the way that
Yeah. So were there any final resources or thoughts where people can go to learn more about, VPC Lattice and how to build out an infrastructure using it before your new blog that's coming soon?
Oh yeah. So let's see some of those ones again. I just want to highlight again, if you're starting out new, please check out the reInvent talk by Justin Davies, the one with the VPC Lattice architecture patterns, best practices, and also look at So for another really good one is that I used a lot for this was building secure multi-account, multi-VPC connectivity for your applications with Amazon VPC Lattice. Okay, that's kind of
let me paste that one in as well, because I don't think I have that one in chat just yet.
And that one pretty much covers the kind of like the holistic view. And then these also they've done a great job of creating a lot of really good resources, ones that I used as I built out this solution. But yeah, start out there, and yeah, that's basically all I have, I think.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in and talking with us today, Bobak. This is really fascinating to learn about this new way of networking. It does very much feel like it is a more streamlined experience and a more secure experience out of the box that you get using VPC Lattice. Highly encourage all of you out there that are building new SaaS applications to take a look at it, see if it can solve some problems for you, or at least make your lives a little bit simpler in the long run. But we are, of course, running up on time here. Time flies when we're having fun. I would like to thank everybody for joining us here live that jumped in. Thank you for the comments earlier. Everybody that's with us, please remember, hit that follow button if you're interested in learning more about AWS and all the different shows that we have. We stream pretty much every day of the week. There's shows going on and lots of great content out there. But until we meet again next time in our next show, which will be 2 weeks from today, I would like to just say to everybody, happy building once again, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.